And particularly where somebody has been seriously catastrophically injured or has lost a loved one, they never ask about the money.
Welcome to a special edition episode of the Game Changing Attorney Podcast, featuring conversations with 5 of the top trailblazers in the legal industry.
It's not about the money for those people. It is about making a difference. And we have always practiced something that I call transformative law, which is that in every case, we try to find a way to make a change so that this doesn't happen to somebody else.
I'm Michael Mogul, founder and CEO of Crisp, the nation's #1 law firm growth company. I've built my business through practice, not theory. Crisp started with just $500 to my name and has grown to over 8 figures in revenue over the last few years, earning a spot on the Inc. 500 list of the fastest growing private companies in America. Our approach has been to take everything we've learned about generating massive growth within our own organization and help the country's most ambitious and committed law firm owners do the same for theirs. In each episode of this podcast, I sit down with innovative market leaders from the legal industry and beyond to learn from those who thrive in the face of adversity, challenge the status quo, and define what it means to be a true game changer. Today, we'll be looking back at some of our most insightful conversations with guests who didn't just build successful practices, they've redefined what it means to be a game changer. From navigating adversity early on to building on their remarkable success, these trailblazers have fundamentally changed the legal landscape. We dive into each of their unique stories to uncover the leadership principles, resilience, and strategic thinking required to build legacies that stand the test of time.
I can go back in my life, like Steve Jobs said, when you connect the dots backwards, and I can look at things that happened in my life that I thought were bad at the time that turned out to be incredible lessons and gifts for me.
That's coming up on the Game Changing Attorney Podcast. Before we begin today's episode, I want to remind you that we aren't beholden to any sponsors or run any ads on this podcast. This allows us to present all of our episodes raw and unfiltered. I'm not going to push any made-to-order meal services on you or try to save you any money on your car insurance. That being said, I have one small request. If you receive any value from this podcast, please give it a 5-star review. Pay the fee so we can keep this podcast free. When it comes to building a nationally recognized firm that leads with both results and values, Eric Chaffin of Chaffin Luhana sets a high bar, having recovered over $1 billion for their clients and earning a spot on the Inc. 5000 list of the fastest growing private companies in America. Eric's approach is grounded in his personal journey of overcoming adversity, and it's that experience that's helped shape the firm's core mission of doing good by doing right. During our conversation, I asked Eric about the experiences that shaped him into the leader he is today.
I had a really hardworking father who's a steel worker. He's also a construction worker, just someone who's phenomenally good with his hands. And so he's very entrepreneurial, always kind of working things on the side, doing different things, and pretty much a workaholic. So I learned my drive and work ethic from him. And then, of course, juxtapose that to my mom, who is, the quintessential traditional homemaker, who is just such a lovely person, very caring and compassionate. They married as teenagers, and so I pretty much grew up with them. And so that pretty much, for the longest time, that's what I publicly say about what formed me as a person. I think more recently, what I would say is age 5, I was sexually abused. It's something I hadn't actually really come to terms with or even talk about until the last few years. And so that probably impacted me and shaped my life a lot more than I knew until I really worked through that and understood how it impacted my life positively. Because frankly, with the statistics around people that face that kind of trauma, oftentimes they end up in a much different position. I think could have produced a different Eric than it did. And I feel actually blessed and fortunate that I am where I am. So,
And how would you say it impacted your life positively?
When I first started working through my trauma, I started January 2015. I started meditating January 8th, 2015. And I think within the first year of that, I really started coming to terms with things that were coming up for me, whether it's anger or different issues, like even sitting down on a podcast with a guy, like I would actually have issues, on my team. Most of our team members for the longest time were female. There was very few men in my firm. And I think it's just things that were coming up for me. And so that's the negative part of it. The positive side of it is that I, from a very early age, understood what it meant to not have a voice. I knew what it meant to not feel like you could go to someone and seek help and get help from others. And so I took those feelings and I really turned them into a drive to go help others. And so it's what motivated me to go to law school. It's what motivated me to be a federal prosecutor. It pushed me to be my very best at times so I could be the best I could for my clients, for the government, for the victims of the government I represented. And so it really defines my sense of justice in this world and really what my firm's about today.
And is it true that you were the first or among the first in your family to go to college?
Yeah, first to go to college, and almost didn't make it there. I remember I went to WVU and met with a professor before I went, and he actually told me I should take some time off and get serious about life because I was pretty much failing out of high school because I worked all the time. I ran a pizza shop and I really didn't study. And so when he told me that, of course, I was like, screw that. I'm gonna do this. And he motivated me to go to college and do well. So
I didn't know this. So running a pizza shop, was there any, I'm curious, even through that experience, anything that you learned then that's been helpful to you today?
You know, I love Chef's Table, the pizza one that's out now, if you haven't seen it yet. But no, seriously, it's, you learn hard work. In terms of male relationships, my dad was working all the time, so I wasn't around him as much. I had a gentleman there, Frank Davis, who was like a father to me and really taught me a lot about life and just hard work, focus. And I remember though too, like just as an employer now, I went to them at a young age and I said, hey guys, like I'm pretty much running the shop and you should make me a manager. And the response was, I'll either make you a manager or you can get a raise. And I'm like, wait, what do you mean? One of the two? I should be getting both. And but it was just my early experiences and it made me work that much harder to earn their respect. And I think there's a lot about life that you learn from something like that.
Which did you pick, the raise or the title?
I took the raise at that time.
Yep.
Yeah, because I had the respect as a leader within the shop. And I mean, I was in high school dating college girls who were cheerleaders, and it was like they all come home for the summer. And I was like, that's what leadership was to me at that time. It's just being kind of the top dog in the room. And it's funny how your perspective is at that time.
So it's interesting, and you're not the first to say this. It's fascinating to me of people who were not the best, let's say, students academically, whether it was through high school or even college, and yet you get to law school and they thrive. Was that the case for you?
Yeah, it's funny. So once it was Professor DeClerico told me, get serious about life. I actually went to WVU and I graded into the honor system. I think I was one of 5 kids out of 20-some thousand that graded into the honor system. So I had to get I had to have a 3.8 average. So I got a 3.6 the first semester, 4 the second semester. I graded into it. And then I was actually proud. I didn't get the Rhodes Scholarship, but Professor DeClerico, who told me to get serious about life, ended up asking me to apply for the Rhodes Scholarship 3 years later. And so, yeah, I took off, and it was that reverse psychology that helped.
It's just fascinating to hear that at some point in your life, you had somebody tell you to get serious about life. It's interesting, right? How we ultimately grow up, you being obviously such a disciplined person today, and maybe that was not always the case. I remember Nick Rowley's on the podcast was sharing a very similar story of just the fact that, he didn't really become as disciplined as he is today until probably late stages in law school.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think there's other things that impacted me. I think, my father gave me a book, The Magic of Thinking Big, and it really taught me to dream, to really look beyond my circumstances. I think it's just, I took it to heart. Stories he would tell me, he was a very poor kid in Western Pennsylvania growing up. He used to, have one pair of pants he'd wash each day before he went to school because he just, couldn't afford anything more. He'd collect pop balls alongside the road and kids would throw stuff at him. I took those stories and internalized them to myself, and I use them to motivate myself at times. And so probably, Michael, I'm sure you could relate to is, that just sort of immigrant journey. I know with Rupal, who's my law partner, very similar. We internalize and we start looking for financial security. And so it really drives you for success. At the same time, I think it can drive you too far. And I certainly have had points in my life that happened, but yeah, it definitely gave me a drive.
So I'm curious, so coming out of law school, you went to a large corporate defense firm and then later moved on to being a prosecutor. What was that journey like?
Yeah. So first of all, I went to law school with the mindset that, okay, great on the law review, do that. And I passed it up because I wanted to try cases. And so I did really well in moot court, and I got invited to be a third-year practice certified intern at the U.S. Attorney's Office. So I tried 3 cases to verdict during my third year of law school. And so coming out, I'm like, okay, where do I go and what can I do? And the Career Services Office was like, well, you're in the top of your class. You got to go to Pittsburgh. That's where you're going to Pittsburgh. You got to go to the best firm. And so I went to Reed Smith, which is the best firm at that time. And I walked in, I'm like, this place is nothing like what I expected it to be or wanted to be. And I just had no frame of reference. But I found my way onto a couple of trial teams, tried some cases. But at some point in time, I found myself working in the labor and employment group. And it turns out one of the attorneys I was working with actually worked on a case that involved my dad. And I didn't know at the time, but my dad growing up, and part of this is on our website, but I'll tell you the full story. Growing up, my dad would take me into like lumber yards and different places with him. And he'd use examples with me of like, just people like shaking hands and treating everyone with respect and humility. Don't forget where you come from is what he would tell me. One of the stories, he was in a union arbitration where he as a union worker was actually in the arbitration and testified. And then afterwards, he went around the room and shook hands with people. And he went to shake hands with this attorney, and the attorney refused to shake his hand. And so he used to use that as an example with me growing up, like, hey, never be like that. When you become a lawyer, treat people with respect, understand where you came from. And so I ended up at Reed Smith, and I went to do a clerkship, and I came back, and I was working with this lawyer, and one day he came into my office and said, hey, listen, I'm working for the steel mill in West Virginia. We're in West Virginia, which is where you grew up. And I haven't worked with him for years, but I'd like you to go, with me on this and work on it. And I was like, okay. And it dawned on me that the attorney walked with a limp and had a cane. And my dad had told me about the story with the attorney who wouldn't shake his hand. And he told me some attributes physically of the guy, and it was the match with this guy. And so I went back to my dad and I was like, hey, listen, was this person happen to be X person? And he's like, yeah, how did you know that? And it turned out it was the person that I was working with. And so, I get almost tearful thinking about that, because when I look back at it now, it's just my heart wasn't aligned with where I was, obviously. And I was trying cases, I was doing things on a level that most second, third year associates at Reed Smith weren't getting to do, but it just didn't sit well with me in terms of a person who I was. From that, I just decided I didn't want to do corporate work, didn't sit well with me. And it works for some people. I have great friends that still do that work and have a lot of respect for it, but it just wasn't who I was as a person.
So then how do you go on to become federal prosecutor? And then what was that experience like?
Yeah, it's great. I have to say, people say that being a federal prosecutor and assistant U.S. attorney is one of the greatest jobs there is. And it's true, particularly in New York City. I went there in 1999 and just had phenomenal trial experience. And the great thing about the U.S. Attorney's Office is that you go and you become a prosecutor who can stand on their feet, argue cases, connect with jurors. The jurors look much different than how I grew up. I grew up in very gentrified white West Virginia, went to Brooklyn, New York, where there's a lot of minorities. And I had to learn how to really talk and become someone a little bit different actually in working with those jurors, which I think is an important life lesson. But then, of course, you have to know how to write. You actually have to be able to do wiretap applications and explain your proof. And all those early skill building things are really important to me. But probably the thing that impacted me the most was my wife at that time was pregnant with my son, and then 9/11 happened. And we always thought that we would end up back in Pittsburgh. And then after we lived through 9/11, we just decided, at the time, Rudy Giuliani, when he was, I will say, in my opinion, sane, we really took to heart what he said and decided to stay in New York and really make a home of it. And so we stay in New York, but I did make my way back to Pittsburgh.
So I don't know that I'd ever asked you this. I'm curious, what was the reasoning behind your decision to start your own firm?
Yeah, I say it's planes and prostitutes. That's the reason why I did. And I came out of the U.S. Attorney's Office and I passed up being a partner at, major law firms. And, at the time we were having an executive coach and her saying to me, are you sure you want to do this? And at first I'm like, well, yeah, I do. And, she's like, yeah, the money's one thing. You're passing up a lot to go this other route. But I'm concerned about you. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, well, you have this passion when you talk about it. It's just driving passion that I'm a little concerned you're going to get burned out. And so it's time. I'm like, yeah, whatever. That's all nice. But of course I'm going to go do this. And I did. I was very idealistic in terms of what I thought a plaintiff's attorney was supposed to be. And I ended up with a couple of firms where the values weren't aligned with where I was, but had the good fortune of actually finding someone within those firms, Luhana, who's my law partner now, who really our values were aligned, and we worked a lot together. And eventually, after just a couple of situations, we had a client where Rupal and I were getting on a plane to fly to Los Angeles to try a case. Literally, we landed in LA, and we got word from one of the partners that it was my client, and without telling the client, the case got settled. And so I'm just like, you know what? This is complete bullshit. This isn't the way I want to practice my my cases and my area of law that I want to practice in. And so we just decided we should start a firm.
What were those values? I'm curious, when you and Rupal met, what were the values that you were aligned on? Were you a partner person at the time? Did you anticipate kind of going that route?
So I was an associate. She was an associate, but she was actually coming right out of law school. And of course, I had the experience I did in terms of big firm clerkship and then federal prosecutor. So I felt like I knew a lot more than I probably did at the time. We were doing a lot of securities fraud litigation at that time. And so we spent, a couple of years working together. I became a partner at the firm I was at that time. We actually left and then went to another firm and started up the mass tort practice at the other firm. I remember sitting down with the partners of the second firm, and Rupal was actually expecting with one of her daughters at that time, and them kind of going wait, you're bringing her with you? She's expecting. And I'm going are you kidding me? This day and age, we're actually having this conversation. And so I was like, yeah, of course I'm vouching for Rupal of all people. She's the hardest. She's worked harder than most anybody, tremendously hard worker. But yeah, I think for us, it was the values, loyalty, family is really important. Certainly hard work is critically important. And Rupal's just wickedly smart, really capable person, and a great lawyer. So
how would you describe the dynamic between the two of you?
It's interesting. I think we understand the dynamic better having worked with Crisp and Jess and certainly understanding our print and Colby, for example. But when we first started, I did a lot of, sort of bigger picture. I would do depositions. Rupal did all the prep for him, did a lot of things like that. And so she's very detail-oriented, whereas I was more bigger picture. And of course, love doing cross-examinations. And so that was probably our early on dynamic. And now flip the roles, and Rupal's in Florida today and this week and next week arguing Daubert motions and the Zantac litigation. My other partner, Pat Booth, trying a case in Pittsburgh right now. And it's been an adjustment for me in a really good way, a very positive way, just to step back and, be able to support them and what they're doing, and it comes full circle.
And Eric, I know, interestingly enough, we were actually talking about this earlier today. What would you say, just even between the two of you and the firm, have been some of the greatest achievements?
So, we did the dentures use of litigation. So Super Polygrip, for example, doesn't have zinc any longer. I know we had a hand in that. There are other pieces of that case, like the fixant litigation, which was, we did 14 appeals in that part of the litigation. I like to say the defense attorneys at the time, but also say now, is it was one of the greatest pro bono projects we ever done. Because look, if you want to say doing good by doing right, you got to live by it. You got to actually follow that path and walk that walk. And so we do that as a firm. And so we make a conscious decision about what we're going to invest our time and money into. And then we go in and we do it. And that's something I think we're very proud of.
So speaking of which, I know you just mentioned it, doing good by doing right. I guess you could say it's almost like a slogan of the firm today. How did that come to be?
Yeah, I think initially it was, part of what I said, the planes and prostitutes sort of reaction to that is, that's not who we are. That's not what we wanted to be. You take sort of that old guard sort of view of mass torts and what people are doing. Like, there's just a reaction to that to some degree. With that said, I think the fuller knowledge from my perspective is just my own personal journey. Having been sexually abused at a young age, somewhat with a lazy eye, 5-6 years old, feeling all alone and really wanting to do well by my clients, I wanted to make sure that we didn't get lost at some point in that. And so, just our relationships, among referral partners, among our clients and our communities.
If Eric's journey was shaped by personal adversity, Rex Elliott's path was driven by something just as powerful, a relentless commitment to stand up for others. For over 2 decades, Rex and his firm, Cooper Elliott, have earned national recognition as one of the top trial firms in the nation. Fueled by an underdog mentality that pulled them away from big law, Rex and his team fight for people who need a true champion in their corner. I asked Rex about the defining moments that shaped his story and the values that continue to drive his mission today.
I look back at my childhood, and I grew up in a community that was really economically diverse. We had a lot of people that had a ton of money, a middle class in our community, and then a lower class. And I was in that lower class. I think my childhood and the community I was raised in was the greatest gift I could ever have, because we didn't have very much money, but I was able to see what was around me and what was possible. And so I was always raised to believe that I could do anything that I wanted to do. And I knew I didn't want to grow up in the conditions that I grew up in. Having said that, I have tremendous memories of my childhood. I had wonderful, loving parents who were much more focused on raising their kids the right way and much less focused on making a lot of money. And so I attribute that sort of experience growing up to the hunger that I have, the drive that I have. But by the same token, I still do very much believe that I had advantages in life that many people don't have, which is why I'm so passionate about representing the underdog and making sure I take care of people that need it the most.
I'm curious about the route to that. So from my understanding, I think your grandfather was a lawyer.
Yeah.
What kind of inspired you to become an attorney?
Yeah, most people don't decide what they're going to do until they get much later in life. I have a vivid recollection. I was probably 8 years old. My grandfather was this big, towering presence. He was 6'6", and he was a trial lawyer in Columbus. And he would take me down to the courthouse and I'd watch him try cases. His presence in the courtroom and the way he spoke to juries got me right away. And so from a very early age, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get to law school. I wanted to be in law school. I had 2 impediments, 2 barriers to getting there. Number one, I was an athlete growing up. And so I kind of got this dumb jock moniker about me. I played football, basketball, baseball. People thought that was my interest. And I always felt like I was fighting to make sure that people understood I had intelligence, that I had an intellect as well. And the second thing was money. I wondered if I could afford college to begin with. And then certainly law school appeared a little bit out of reach financially, but I just continued on the path and told myself I'd figure it out when we got there.
And from what I hear, you paid your way through college and in law school through working in construction.
I did. I actually started working on building high voltage transmission power lines in high school. I would go away for the summers. I was in Minnesota, New Mexico, California. I was in Las Vegas I took a year off between college and law school to make enough money to go to law school. I took a semester off in college. I ended up graduating in 3.5 years because I had to. I had to leave college and go away for 8 months so that I could make some money to return to school. It's like I said, I think that had a profound impact on me too, because I really learned at a young age what hard work was all about and what hard work could do for you.
Yeah. Did you ever have, just even going through college, then in law school, like any doubts or hesitations, like, am I in the right place? Am I pursuing the right path?
Yeah, I many times questioned whether or not I was capable enough to do this. On the financial side of things, I got to law school with enough money to make it through 2 years of law school. And again, I just figured out I'd go through and I'd figure it out by the time I got to my third year. And the first 2 years were financed largely through the money I'd made in the year off between college and law school, and also loans, right? Well, I maxed out my loans for the third year. So I applied for a graduate school fellowship at Syracuse University, and I was one of 2 graduate school fellowships awarded that year. That's the only way I could have gotten through my third year. It paid my entire tuition and gave me a stipend for that third year. So a big part of me thinks that there's been a whole lot of hard work in this, but there's been a little bit of luck along the way as well.
Yeah. And it sounds like it. And I think you've already had this realization, but with a lot of the people that I speak with that come from backgrounds of adversity, today they look at that as like, what an advantage. It's helped me develop a lot of just the right mindset, the right skills, the right capabilities that perhaps I may not have developed if I came from a life of privilege.
Oh, no question about it. I can look back at points in my life. There's an old parable about a Chinese farmer. It's could be good, could be bad, right? Something really good happens in somebody's life, and it turns out to be not such a good thing, right? Or something really bad and challenging happens, turns out to be one of the best things that ever happened to him. I can go back in my life, like Steve Jobs said, when you connect the dots backwards, and I can look at things that happened in my life that I thought were bad at the time that turned out to be incredible lessons and gifts for me that led me on to great things. And I can do the same thing about good things. If you have really good things that happen to you and you get all prideful and you forget where you came from and you start to run over people and things of that nature, it can turn into a really bad thing. So never gotten too high over the good things that happen. And I've always, in the low moments, I've tried to see through the moment and try to figure out why it was that was happening to me at the time, trying to make sure that I understood, that I saw the path that was being sort of laid out for me. I think if you're not listening and observing those kinds of things, you'll miss them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious about when you graduated from law school and you started working at a larger firm representing corporations, then that was before stepping into private practice. Why that transition?
Yeah, well, first of all, kind of to your point about wondering if I was capable here, certainly I got through college, did very well, undergrad at a very challenging small liberal arts school, Denison University. And then I went on to Syracuse University for law school. And when I got to Syracuse, I wondered, am I smart enough for this? Can I compete with a lot of really smart people? And I could. I demonstrated that. I graduated in the top 2% of my class through a lot of hard work, not because I was smarter than everybody else, but because I worked really, really hard. I always say I think I outworked people. Then I get to Sullivan and Cromwell, which is arguably, if not the best, then one of the best law firms in the entire world. And we had 90 new associates start my class, and nobody was from Syracuse. Nobody was from a tier 2 law school that I was. They were from Harvard and Yale and Penn and Michigan and Stanford and Virginia. And I wondered then, am I in the right place? And turned out I was. It was a remarkable experience for me. But at each stage, I think I benefited from questioning whether or not I had it in me to get through that next part of my life. And I think that really caused me to work incredibly hard to make sure I didn't fail.
Right. So then why leave and why open up your own practice?
Yeah, so I had a tremendous experience in New York City. I was there a little shy of 4 years. Wonderful experience. I did a lot of work in the NFL antitrust cases, so I had direct access to the NFL executives. I deposed NFLPA significant executives. I got to meet players. I worked on the RJR Nabisco takeover, which was at the time the largest takeover in our country. And so I did some amazing things, but I had an experience at Sullivan and Cromwell. I worked on a team that worked on a pro bono death penalty case down in North Carolina. It was an African-American man who was dating a white woman in North Carolina. And there was a scuffle late at night, and the African-American man killed her former white boyfriend. He had always claimed self-defense. He had always claimed that the guy was coming after him with a knife. And the reality is, though, this guy who was also in the military went to trial with a court-appointed lawyer who happened to be a divorce lawyer. The case was tried in front of an all-white jury. This is a black man that killed a black man who was dating a white woman, and all-white jury. His divorce lawyer, court-appointed lawyer, started crying and ran out of the courtroom in his closing argument, and he was convicted of the murder and put on death row. And so our charge at Sullivan and Cromwell was to get him off death row. And the individual's name was Willie Gladden. He was a wonderful, wonderful person. I got a chance to sit down with him an awful lot. And we tried the case, and the only issue was death or life in prison. And we were able to get him off death row and a life in prison. He's since been able to get out of prison, and he's led a really productive life. I felt for the first time that my license to practice law was being used in the way that God intended me to use it. I was helping another person that needed it the most. I loved my experience in big law firms, but the reality is at some point when you're representing Fortune 500 companies, and it's really, really important work, but I felt at some point like I was moving money around a balance sheet, that I really wasn't impacting the world. And that's what led me to leave big law firms and start my own practice where I could impact people.
While Rex Elliott's story is about grit and standing up for people who need someone in their corner, our next guest took on a different kind of challenge. Randi McGinn pushed back against the status quo in a profession where few women had. She's one of the most accomplished trial lawyers in the country, the first woman to lead the elite inner circle of advocates, and she's won over 130 trials. Randi didn't just open doors, she changed the game. During our conversation, we discussed a case early in her career that helped her find her purpose as a trial lawyer.
Contrary to popular belief, sort of the notion, I think, in the public is that, people can't wait for something bad to happen to them. They rush to the lawyer and say, how much money am I going to get? And I can tell you, I've never had that happen in 40 years of practicing law. And particularly where somebody has been seriously, catastrophically injured or has lost a loved one, they never ask about the money. The first time I realized that was probably a couple years into my practice when a woman's son was killed in a motorcycle accident by a drunk driver. And of course, the driver hit them, only had $25,000 of insurance, and they offered it up right away. And I called her and said, great news, we've gotten this case settled. And she wouldn't come pick up the check. All right. And finally, called her. Now 2 months has gone by. Finally, she comes in and sits across the table from me, and I put the check on the table, and she won't pick it up. And she just bursts into tears and says, how can I take money from my son dying? And that's when I realized it's not about the money for those people. It is about making a difference. And what I said to her was, then take the money and give it to Mothers Against Drunk Driving, or take the money and do something to stop drunk driving. And from that moment on, early in my practice, we have always practiced something that I call transformative law, which is that in every case, we try to find a way to make a change so that this doesn't happen to somebody else. And we've done that. We've gotten about 40% of the defendants that we've sued, of the corporate defendants that we've sued, to make changes over the years. And the way we typically do it is we'll say to the defendant, look, we'll start settlement negotiations at $5 million if you make no changes. If you make the following 10 changes, we'll start settlement negotiations at $2 million. Now, it's a very interesting offer to them, and it does a couple things. One, it tells you instantly what kind of company it is. I mean, in truth, if it were a good company, they would have already made the changes before you sued them to make sure this didn't happen again. But we've never had that happen, by the way. Never had them say, oh, on my own, I'm going to change this so somebody else doesn't get killed. So about 40% of them say, okay, we'll make the changes. The other 60% say, if we make the changes, it's coming out of our bottom line. We're going to have to pay for it. But if you hit me for a big verdict, the insurance company's going to pay for it. So I'm going to start at the higher number because we're not going to make any changes. And when somebody on the other side of you does that, Michael, they've shown you exactly who they are, haven't they? Yep. And now you have no qualms about taking it to them and getting the biggest verdict you can possibly get to make an impression, not just on them, but on their insurance company. And so it's sort of a litmus test of who you're dealing with on the other side. And like I say, that if they don't want to make the changes, fine, we'll go get you. Okay.
Yeah. I remember reading on your website, there's this quote that, the harder we work, the luckier we get. But you also state that you spend anywhere from 200 to 300 hours outside of the courtroom for every hour in the courtroom. What does the preparation look like typically for you?
It's just a tremendous amount of work, and most of it comes from the investigation that even just in truck accidents, truck collisions, or auto accident cases where the police do the investigation, almost always they don't have the resources to do the kind of investigation that we do. So we go do another investigation, and we usually find many more witnesses, many more things at the scene, including pieces of tires that have been shredded. That's important. And the other thing that's really important for trial lawyers, which a lot of trial lawyers don't do, is you always go to the scene of wherever this happened. Always, always, always. Because there are things, even if the wreck is long over, or whatever, the explosion or whatever it is that has happened has been long over, there are things that you learn by going to the place where it happened that you wouldn't know if you hadn't been there. And so for example, there was a intersection out by our jail that was put way, way outside of town, and a jail guard ran the stop sign and hit our kid who was coming out of this racetrack at night, just ran the stop sign and killed him, going about 75, 80 miles an hour, hit him sideways, killed our kid. We went out to the scene of where this was, and the jail, was sort of a remote location. But as we stood there at the scene, not just every car, all the police cars that were going to the jail and all of the prison vans and everybody all ran the stop sign. They were, as we're standing out there, we're just watching these cars just run the stop sign, run the stop sign, run the stop sign, run the stop sign. And we said, holy cow, what's going on here? And what had happened is the police department and the jail guards were upset when they moved the jail so far out of town. And so they made up for, when the city didn't listen to them and still bought this property and built the jail out there, they made up for it by just not following the laws as far as speeding and also running the stop sign, because they didn't want to take the time out of their beat to get to the jail back and forth. So we set up a video camera right there on the corner of this intersection and videoed, like 94 days of police cars and prison vans running this stop sign, and had a claim against not just the driver who ran the stop sign, but against the police department for violating the law and not enforcing the law. And so we would have never known that had we not gone out to the scene of the crash, So it's that kind of stuff.
And obviously, just from your outcomes, these are not typical outcomes. For the results that you've been achieving just over the years, the consistency. I'm just curious, what do you believe makes for a great trial lawyer?
He or she who tells the best story wins. That's how it works. That's the secret to winning cases. And so if you're going to be a great trial lawyer, you have to become a master storyteller, and you do that by first being a student of storytelling. And so if you are watching a movie that has that affects you greatly, or if you're reading a book that touches you in some way, you need to break down why it is that book or movie was so effective, and what about it, what about the story was effective. So things like, what point of view is the story told from? And what is the most effective point of view? What kind of chronology do they use? Do they tell it from beginning to end? Do they start in the middle? Do they start and then go have a flashback? How did it work Or did they have two-track storytelling, sort of the Jaws way of the movie, right? You hear the music, dun, 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 and you see the little person playing in the water, and then you hear the dun, 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 and you don't even see the shark, you just hear the music, person playing in the water, dun, 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 now you see the fin come up, and you're saying, oh my gosh, it's building tension as you see this thing coming to each other. So you see that how effective that was, and you say, can I use that in the courtroom to tell a story? Can I say, here is the drunk driver slamming it down. Here is our little family getting ready to go to church. Here is the drunk driver having another one. Here's the family coming to church. You tell the story in a way, it's building suspense, and the jury knows what's going to happen before it ever happens. And so that's what I tell young lawyers, is that you've got to learn how to tell stories. And if you're just terrible at it, the best advice I can give people is to sit down with little kids, as you know, Michael, and because they won't put up with a bad story, right? Whether it's a bad book that you're reading or whatever it is, and read stories to little kids, because you have to not just tell the story, you have to do the voices, and you have to have the person, pop out, and you have to keep their interest. And so it's a great way of learning how to tell stories. And actually, that's my earliest memories are, I was the oldest of 5 kids in like the 50s, when they had those cocktail parties, and my parents would have cocktail parties, and my job was to stay back there with my brothers and sisters and keep them entertained so they didn't disturb the party. So I would have to tell them stories, and I would make up stories in the back room and tell them all these stories to keep them entertained. So that's how you learn how to do it.
Randi's story is a masterclass in changing the system from the inside out. Now we're shifting gears to someone who's made a name for herself in a completely different world: high-profile celebrity divorce. When it comes to Hollywood breakups, few names carry more weight than Laura Wasser. She represents stars like Kim Kardashian, Ryan Reynolds, Britney Spears, and Angelina Jolie, and that's just the short list. Known as one of the top divorce attorneys in the country, Laura handles media attention with unmatched discretion, always focusing on resolution over drama. I asked her how she became the go-to lawyer for the biggest names in the spotlight.
Back in the day, I was probably one of the younger family law practitioners, because usually family law firms are smaller boutique firms. So it's kind of hard to get your foot in the door. So once I got my foot in the door here, then, I went to school here at Beverly Hills High School. I knew a lot of people that had gone into the entertainment industry. So they were either managers or entertainment attorneys or agents, and they had clients that wanted to talk to somebody that maybe looked like them, sounded like them, didn't mind the tattoo or the multiple piercings. And so they would send in Laura Wasser to talk to, whether it was a young pop star whose all of her agents really wanted her to have a prenuptial agreement, or somebody that was going through, a custody situation and needed somebody to understand what clubs that they were going to, or maybe didn't need to go to while they had kids. And so that was me. And that's how it kind of came to be. And then I think our success and really discretion in terms of trying to keep things relatively out of the public eye as people are going through a difficult time has been really some of the secret to our success at this firm.
In working with numerous celebrities, how are these celebrity cases different from non-celebrity cases?
They're not so different. I mean, I say all the time that divorce is the great equalizer. I mean, and yes, some of the celebrities may have more money than your average person, but most of our clients at the firm are pretty high net worth. I think the biggest change would be the media and trying to keep things private and out of the media for the benefit of the family. And then the other thing is that often celebrities have a lot of people with whom they surround themselves who are getting paid either a percentage of what they make or just on payroll to make sure that that celebrity is happy and taken care of. And so that job is to say yes a lot. And that's not my job, because all my job is to interpret and imply the law. I can't change the law. I'm not a legislator. So I don't always say yes. And I end up saying no. And sometimes a celebrity who has now been for many years in the spotlight and surrounded her or himself with people that say yes, here's no, and they may not like that right away. They may even say, I don't think this is a good fit and I don't want to work with you anymore. And then they may actually come back later and say, I appreciate that you weren't trying to blow sunshine up my ass. I want to work with you.
And why is that important, just in terms of like going about a case and not being a yes man?
Because you really have to build realistic expectations in family law. People are the most sophisticated, successful, intelligent head of a studio or investment banker come to you, and he or she will say, I don't know anything about divorce law. And you're like, well, of course you don't. Why would you? It's a totally foreign place for these folks, and it's dealing with the most raw and important emotions that they have regarding their significant other, their children. It's scary. So if someone comes to you and says, well, obviously I'm the mom, so I should have the kids full time, right? You have to say, no. In California, we have, not a written assumption, but kind of a presumption that both parents will have equal time with the children. And I can't tell you that you're the mom and you should have the kids. And just because he's a jerk and he cheated on you, that might make him a bad husband. It doesn't make him a bad parent. And your kids have a right to experience their other parent as well. And so I think it's really important because it's a confusing and emotional enough time to not have somebody giving you the straight.
Just looking back, was there a particular client or a case that was really kind of the catalyst behind a lot of this growth and kind of building this brand?
I had done a lot of work for Stevie Wonder over the years with different partners that he had and the children that he had. And even though those were completely sealed cases, because paternity actions in California are sealed, we became close. And I think just at that time, the people he knew, the people he referred, I think a lot of it really was word of mouth. We don't do any advertising at the firm. And so I think that was helpful. And then there were things that got picked up by the media. When I represented Britney or Christina Aguilera, some of those earlier cases, did get some media pickup. But like I said, we really do try to keep it quiet. But for the fact that family law filings in California are public, we try not to get any of the other details of what's going on in those cases into the public eye.
Which is fascinating, because I've read that you don't like that these filings are public. In fact, you don't believe that they should be public.
That's true. And I've gone head to head with some of the news organizations in terms of, weighing the interests. I understand the argument that keeping things public keeps judicial officers from giving preferential treatment or anything else. I have enough faith in our judicial officers that I don't think they're going to give anyone preferential treatment, whether they're private or public. And I do think that people have a right. I mean, now we finish a divorce judgment and it says the address of the family, the custody schedule of their kids, the amount of support one party's paying the other every month, every car and piece of art that they receive, that's all available in the public realm. There's something about that doesn't strike me as particularly equitable. Even though these people have opted for a public lifestyle, they should be able to keep some of this stuff private. So we figured out a few loopholes and ways of doing that. But for the most part, for enforcement purposes, they are public. And, that gives some great fodder for news organizations.
It's interesting because as outsiders, I think someone will read something in a magazine or a paper and see these two celebrities break up and think, this person's good, this person's bad. How could they do this? But from your experience working with them on a more intimate basis, I think you learned that you really can't judge these people.
No, I mean, that is what I always say. You can't judge. You never know what's really going on. I mean, hey, I hear it all and I still don't always know what's going on because it's a very intricate and detailed, conscious and subconscious situation that people are in. So no, you can't judge. You have to hope people will behave as well as they can when they're going through an incredibly painful and scary period.
I imagine you've dealt with the media a lot. What are some of the lessons you've learned in dealing with the media?
Keep your mouth shut. I mean, there's just I will admit, I am not smart enough or savvy enough to be able to navigate. So just saying nothing is really the best course of action. Quotes can be misconstrued. They get you when you're coming out of the courthouse. And, I'm not a very big person and there's 25 people walking backwards with cameras and microphones. It's actually scary. And so I definitely think that the best thing is to say nothing. Most of our clients will have PR people and they can speak better to that kind of stuff. It's not we're trying the case. We don't have juries in family law in California. So we're really trying the case for one person, and that's the judge. And he or she is unlikely to be, keeping in touch with TMZ or Dateline or whatever the online things are. So as far as I'm concerned, whatever he or she is reading is the pleadings we put out there. And there's not much more that I have to say about it. I don't like cases that are tried in the court of public opinion. That's not really how I roll.
And today, it sounds like you're in a very privileged position in the sense that you don't have to take on any case that you don't want to accept. Like, what are your criteria for when you decide to say yes or say no to a case?
There's a financial criteria because that doesn't make sense for us to take them if they really can't afford us. My assistant, Vicky, does a screening of almost any of my prospective clients that calls. And we try to, work with people that already have relatively realistic expectations. Somebody that comes in, Vicky can usually weed out the crazies. And I am lucky. I don't have to take on cases that are going to make me or anybody else in my staff miserable. It's Southern California. Almost everybody's been or in some kind of mental health care, therapy, whatever. We're not therapists. We're lawyers. You need to go somewhere else for the therapy. We're good handholders. We've got good bedside manner. We try to explain things in simple terms so that people understand them. But in terms of the emotional healing that it comes along with this process, we're not best equipped to be able to provide that.
And actually on that note, because I want to dig in a little bit more in terms of like the providing of legal support versus emotional support. So it seems like you're pretty clear in the sense of the legal support side, but you're not really the shoulder to cry on.
No, and I don't mean to sound harsh about it. I'm just not qualified. And I've had people come back later and say, I really appreciate it. Like, you always seem to understand what I was going through and you had compassion for me, but you didn't try to like be my friend or, trade advice over a glass of Chardonnay. And I really do appreciate that. And so I try, that's something you kind of with time build up because you get very, very close with these people. They tell you everything about them and it's hard not to feel like you're friends and be there for them. I mean, we really do. Some of the younger attorneys at the firm know that we kind of have a policy that you return an email or text or a call within 24 hours. These people need to know somebody's there at the other end. But, being very realistic about what you're saying to them on the other end, I think is very important.
And what about in terms of just setting boundaries? I mean, I imagine maybe early on that there's an opportunity to get caught up in kind of the celebrity of everything that was going on in Los Angeles between, being invited to various parties and things like that. Have you aimed to keep a distance between you and your clients in that industry, or have you basically become more integrated with it?
You have to remember who you are. You're not their friend. Sometimes you'll get invited to a party and you can either go and leave at the appropriate time. You don't want to be the last one there swinging from, chandelier or anything. It's still work. There's a couple clients over the years that outside of the case I've become friendly with, but for the most part, we're getting paid a lot of dollars per hour to represent these people and we're not their friends. And yeah, I mean, to be perfectly honest, it's not that hard to set the boundaries because after the case is over, they usually are very appreciative and respectful, but they don't want to hang out with us either because we remind them of a painful time.
And I'm curious from the business side of it in terms of like building your team. I imagine if you have new people coming on board, given the nature of your clients, I mean, there's a certain level of discretion. Are there things that you do to prepare people for what that's going to be like?
I think they know. And I think the discretion aspect of it is so important that you wouldn't even come for a job interview here unless you realize that and were able to deal with that. And really, in my 27 years of practicing, we've had little or no kind of security breaches, which has been pretty amazing. And that really speaks to the caliber of people that we have working here, all the way from our IT and file clerks to, the equity partners.
While Laura Wasser handles high-stakes cases behind closed doors, Ben Crump often does it with the whole world watching. His work has brought national attention to the injustice built into America's legal system. Netflix featured him in the documentary Civil, and Time magazine named him one of the top 100 most influential people in the world. I asked Ben, with every injustice he's seen, how he stays hopeful every time he steps into a fight.
The reason I do remain optimistic is twofold. I grew up in the government housing projects. Single mother raised me and my two little brothers. The statistics said that, hey, you're going to end up in a minimum wage job, or you're going to end up in prison, or you're going to end up dead. That's what the statistics said about me and every other little black boy growing up in Lumberton, North Carolina. It was a very depressed community, but here I am. And so that tells you there's always hope. There's always a possibility. And so I think about that, and I think about my daughter and my two nephews who we raised as our own, and I look at them and I see all the optimism in their eyes, and the hope. And I know that we can give them a better world, a better America. And that gives me hope. But the probably the more honest reason why I have hope is not based on me at all. It is based on what they tried to teach us in first year law school about precedent, that everything must be based on precedent. And I'm sure many of the listeners will remember first year law school where they were like, well, we don't care what you think, you got to base it on precedent. And because we have to have the rulings of today be based on the precedent and connected to the rulings of the past, so it can have a lot of logical connection to the rulings that we're going to have for the future. And so they kept beating us across the head. Everything is precedent, precedent, precedent. But I didn't accept that now, Michael, because I understood if what they said were true, I would still be a slave, because the precedent set by the United States Supreme Court was that slavery was legal. But I did understand, even though I disagree with them, what they were trying to teach us about precedent. And that was based on precedent. It's a likely indicator of what is to happen in the future. And so I think about the precedent of Black people in America. I think about how at the founding of this country, we were labeled 3/5 of a human being, of a citizen, and yet we overcame that. I think about the precedent of the Middle Passage, and then I think of the precedent of the United States Supreme Court decision in Dred Scott, where they said there were no rights that a Black man had that a white man was bound to respect. Well, we overcame that after the Civil War and Reconstruction and the carpetbaggers and the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. The Supreme Court decision in Plessy v. Ferguson, separate but equal when it was anything but equal. And, we overcame all of those poll taxes and all the other things and the impediments to equality. We overcame that. Then I think about the precedent of how Black people overcame Jim Crow in the early 1900s, and then in the mid 1900s, in the 40s, 50s, all the way up to today. So what that tells me, Michael, is based on the precedent of Black people in America, that whatever the enemies of equality throw at us, we gonna overcome it. We gonna be all right. And that's what gives me encouragement. I know there's nothing that they can do to stop us from overcoming the discrimination, the bias, and the racism.
Yeah. And at the same today, you're a living, breathing embodiment of what is possible. And I'm curious, before you believed in you, I learned that there's quite a number of people that did believe in you, that had hope for you, with your mother and your grandmother. And I'm curious, what led to the decision to go to law school?
My mother and my grandmother had a profound influence on my life. I don't know if you saw the documentary that Netflix had on me, Civil, but it taught a lot about my grandmother. God bless that woman. She was the wisest person I ever met on the face of this earth, even though she only had an 8th grade education. Because when you got to a certain age in North Carolina, you quit going to school and you went to crop tobacco. But my grandmother understood the importance of education. She took out a newspaper subscription, even though she could barely read. And I'll never forget, I was going to the 2nd grade. And every day after I would finish my homework, my grandmother and I would try to read articles in the newspaper, and we'd try to sound out the words and figure out the context of the articles about people like Mother Teresa and President Jimmy Carter and Anwar Sadat and the Peace Accord. And what was amazing about that is what my grandmother really was doing was showing me that there was a bigger world out there for me than just Lumberton, North Carolina. My mother worked 2 jobs as long as I can remember, man. She said, life is hard. You make it fair by what you bring to the table. And if you don't bring nothing to the table, don't expect anybody to let you sit down at the table. She told me education is something to bring to the table because once you have it up here, nobody can take it away from you. And she said that when you get to the table, you make sure you try to leave room to help others get to the table. When I made the decision to become a lawyer, it was partly watching them. I went to Brown versus Board of Education with all deliberate speed, finally got to Lumberton, North Carolina in the late 70s. And so they bused us little black children from South Lumberton, literally across the tracks, to North Lumberton, to the affluent white communities, and where they had a new school, new technology, new facilities, new books, new everything. And so I remember coming back home one day from school, crossed the tracks, and I just observed our neighborhood. You know, you had all the dilapidated buildings, and I just remember thinking, I wonder why people on our side of town have it so challenging, and people on the other side of town seem to have it so accommodating and affluent and better. And I remember my mother saying, well, the reason we got to go to the new school with the new books and the new facilities and everything was because of Brown versus the Board of Education and an attorney named Thurgood Marshall. And I decided right then at 9 years old, when I grow up, I'm going to become an attorney like Thurgood Marshall and fight to make a better situation for people who live in my community, for people who look like me, to have equal opportunity, a better opportunity at the American dream. And from that day to this one, that's what I endeavor to do every day I wake up, every day. I never doubt what my mission is when I wake up.
I hope these conversations with Eric, Rex, Randi, Laura, and Ben left you with a few new insights and a whole lot of inspiration. If you found this episode valuable, here are 3 free ways that I can help you grow your law firm. Number 1, download the first chapter of my book absolutely free at GameChangingAttorney.com. Number 2, you can shoot me a text at 404-531-7691 and I'll answer any question that you've got for me. And finally, number 3, if you can leave this podcast a 5-star review, it'll help us gain access to more influential thought leaders and bring their lessons learned here to you. For more information on this episode, see the show notes in your podcast app or visit legalpodcast.com.